I was standing in the center of our apartment on the eve of Thanksgiving, staring at the overnight bag. I had just a few shirts, pants, and a jumper packed, the luggage Mira had given me for Christmas last year, which I hardly wore. I gently zipped it up, stopping briefly when my phone rang on the kitchen counter. I knew immediately who it was because Mira had been reminding me all week. I grabbed the phone and read the most recent message from an intern she hardly trusted. "Don't make us look foolish again. I spent more time than required staring at the screen this year." My hand was hovering over the keyboard, but what was the point? I explained that I was Griffin Ward, the man who wasn't born with a silver spoon, and that this would alter the way she and her family perceived me. The man who, when they first invited me years ago, was unaware of the distinction between a salad fork and a wine opener. Despite my lifelong efforts to become wealthy, I would always be the stray dog that the mirror dragged in. I grabbed my luggage, threw the phone into my coat pocket, and made my way to the door. Outside, the city was nearly silent as the season's first snow began to fall slowly and softly under the streetlights, calm as if it were warning me to stay, but I disregarded it, because I had already decided to go, if it weren't for Mira. The drive to Vermont took longer than usual, at least because of the slender thread of family duty that continued to pull at me. Every few miles, I passed a car stopped on the side with its hazard lights blinking against the darkness on the icy roads. I kept my hands steady on the wheel and watched the road lines fade into the snow. My chest felt heavy. I remembered Myra's mother, Evelyn, wrinkling her nose the first Thanksgiving I had spent with the Bandoffs. Since I didn't realize homemade was an unwritten requirement at the time, I brought a store-bought pie. I recalled her father, Walter, giving me an overly forceful pat on the back, as if he were trying to test the strength of something he didn't actually have confidence in. I clung to that entire moment when Mira clasped my hand beneath the table in a quiet apology. But over the years, the hand squeezes had stopped. The sidelong stares intensified. I blended in like the assistant, but without the salary. It was almost midnight when I turned onto the long private road leading to the Brafftoft estate. The mansion sat at the top of the hill, illuminated like a Christmas card, with warm golden windows shining in the cold, white world outside. I pulled into the circular driveway and turned off the engine. I sat there for a while, listening to the engine tick as it cooled, attempting to summon the drive to enter. I persuaded myself that maybe this time would be different. Maybe it wouldn't be too horrible. I picked up my luggage, walked slowly up the stone stairs, and pushed open the front door. I anticipated the typical commotion. Evelyn changing the centerpiece, Mira barking commands, Walter yelling at the TV, and Talia chasing Levi and Nora, her two children. But it was quiet. I went inside. The smell of cinnamon candles and something else subtle filled the air as the door swung shut behind me. My footsteps echoed into the living room. The leather couch had two small figures sitting side by side, Levi and Nora. 7-year-old Levi swung his legs uneasily, his sneakers thumping. Nora, just 5, clutched a stuffed bunny to her chest, her thumb firmly in her mouth. They stared. Up as they spotted me, a little relief crossing their faces before something heavier took over. I dropped my luggage beside the door and walked carefully across the room. "Hey, guys," I said softly, kneeling down to meet their eye level. "Where is everyone?" Levi glanced at the fireplace mantel after glancing at Nora. And that's when I noticed it. A white envelope, with my name scrawled on it, carefully positioned, opposite a vase of dead sunflowers. I got up, stepped over, and picked up the envelope. My hands were suddenly unsteady. It was Myra's handwriting. I opened it and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "You look after these brats. Good luck." My heart didn't just sink, it shattered, taking all the remaining trust with it. I stood there, reading the note again and again. My phone buzzed. I didn't want to look. Another text. "But Griffin, this works for you. You're only the housekeeper." My fists burned at my sides. I should have been furious, should have stormed out into the blizzard. But when I turned to face Levi and Nora, I saw how small they were. And it wasn't anger I felt. It was something heavier. Accountability. I shoved the note into my pocket, went back to the kids, and forced a smile. "All right," I said. "Looks like we're hosting a small Thanksgiving celebration of our own." Levi slid off the couch, still not smiling, and reached for my sleeve with tiny fingers. His eyes, usually bright and full of humor, were gloomy and solemn. "Griffin," he whispered. I knelt down again. "What is it, buddy?" I asked. He leaned in closer and mumbled something that made the whole room seem to freeze. "When Mom and Aunt," Mira said, "they're going to make you leave forever." My blood went cold. "What do you mean?" I whispered. "You'll be sad and tired. Then you'll sign the papers. And you'll disappear." His little shoulders trembled. I closed my eyes briefly before opening them again. The betrayal I had felt earlier was nothing compared to this. It wasn't just abandonment. It was a plan. Without hesitation. I hugged Levi and reached for Nora, who clung to me. Their little bodies shuddered against mine. They had ruined more than Thanksgiving. They had broken something sacred. And as I held those children, I realized I would not be their housekeeper. I would be their guardian at all costs. The house felt too big and too silent. I stood there, still holding them, unsure what to do next. Maybe I had expected chaos, laughter, shouting from the kitchen. Instead, there was just hollow silence. I smiled gently. "All right," I said, maintaining a cheerful tone. "Let's get you settled." They nodded softly, trailing after me like tiny ghosts. I led them to the guest bedroom on the first floor. The floorboards creaked under our feet. Family portraits lined the hallway, perfectly staged holiday smiles that made the house feel even more deserted. I wasn't in any of them. The guest room door was ajar. I pushed it open and flicked on the light. Levi and Nora climbed onto the neatly made bed with crisp white sheets curling against the pillows. I tucked the comforter around them carefully. "Are you hungry?" I asked. Levi shrugged between them. Nora nodded, putting her thumb back in her mouth. "Okay," I murmured. "Let's see what Uncle Griffin can cook up." I smiled again, left them settled, and headed to the kitchen. The place looked unnaturally immaculate, like it had been cleaned in a hurry. A burned pumpkin pie sat cooling on the counter, forgotten. I opened the fridge. It was almost empty. No mashed potatoes, no stuffing, no turkey. Just a dejected egg carton, a partial stick of butter, and a few bruised apples. I shut the fridge and leaned against it, rubbing my face with both hands. This wasn't carelessness. They had made sure there was nothing. No food, no welcome, no plans, just the kids. And a nasty note. I opened the pantry. Half a bag of flour, a few boxes of macaroni and cheese. I grabbed 2 cartons and put a pot of water to boil. As I stirred, it was easy to piece it all together. Levi's words, Mira's note. The plan was obvious. They wanted me to be desperate, exhausted, broken enough to sign whatever they shoved in front of me. I plated the macaroni on the best dishes I could find and brought it back to the kids. Their faces lit up when they saw the plates. A look that broke my heart a little more. We ate in silence. Only the clink of forks and the howling wind outside. I cleaned up the dishes, wiped the counters. I wasn't going to give them any reason to call me a slob. When I checked on Levi and Nora again, Levi was swinging his legs like he wanted to say something. "Are you okay, buddy?" I asked, sitting at the foot of the bed. He nodded. "I'm glad you came," he whispered. "I was scared." Nora patted his hair. "A real one this time," she added. She had already fallen asleep, her rabbit cradled in her arms. I got up and left the door slightly ajar so they wouldn't feel trapped. The fire was low in the living room. I threw on a few more logs and sank onto the couch, staring into the flames. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Mira. "Make sure the house looks nice before we return, housekeeper." I stared at it for a long time before tossing the phone onto the coffee table. I didn't reply. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. Instead, I leaned back on the couch and told myself I needed a plan.